And so it actually starts to look more like something akin to treason. I mean, that sounds a ridiculous word to use in this day and age, but the sort of the sense you get is of an almost pantomime villain at this point.
What we're seeing here is of a different order of magnitude. It's not just about that relationship being close. It's not just about it being humiliating or embarrassing or about his judgment and about the kind of taste, frankly, of continuing a friendship with someone like that. This takes it to the level of potential, serious, sustained government corruption.
The Newsagents podcast is brought to you by HSBC UK, opening up a world of opportunity. It's Emily.
It's Lewis, and the latest news, as we were saying there, is that Keir Starmer has handed police a dossier of about Lord Mandelson allegedly leaking highly sensitive information on the economy to Jeffrey Epstein. This follows the news yesterday that the Metropolitan Police, were looking into this. The Cabinet Office has apparently found unredacted versions of emails from the then Business Secretary. Lord Mandelson was Business Secretary in the late 2000s under Gordon Brown, to Jeffrey Epstein, the paedophile financier, and passed them to the police this morning. Keir Starmer apparently telling his cabinet that the leaks were, quote, gobsmacking, and has asked officials, as Emily was saying, to draw up legislation to remove Mandelson's peerage as soon as possible. This following on from the emails, as we were reporting yesterday, an almost stream of consciousness from Mandelson to Epstein when he was the de facto Deputy Prime Minister, among other things, sending Epstein a confidential UK government document outlining 20 billion of asset sales, Mandelson claiming he was trying hard, partly at Epstein's instigation, to change government policy on bankers' bonuses, and telling him about an imminent bailout package for the euro the day before it was announced in 2010. And it is obvious that this could have been extremely commercially useful information to Epstein for his corporate clients.
What is extraordinary is what we are now understanding about the speed at which Mandelson received highly confidential information and literally pressed the forward button on the email, which went straight into Jeffrey Epstein's inbox. And just to put this in context, we are talking about the man who was the business secretary and de facto deputy prime minister right in the middle of the global financial crash.
It's stunning.
The economy was on its knees at that time. We were all trying to work out what the hell was going on. Bankers were the pariah of the entire country. Do you remember this was the time we were trying to strip Fred Goodwin of his peerage because of his part he played in the collapse, in the scandal.
He was the chief executive of RBS.
He was the chief executive of RBS, which then became nationalised. Alistair Darling at the time sort of joked, black comedy, that he was not just the Chancellor, but he was a bank manager. He was literally running the country's banks. And in the middle of this crisis, it was a genuine economic crisis where we did not know for how long the world's financial systems were going to sort of rumble on. Peter Mandelson, we now understand, was passing this highly sensitive, economically sensitive, financially sensitive information to a billionaire who had given him money. And there are two things that occur to me, Lewis. One is, we always called Mandelson the master of the dark arts, the prince of darkness, the arch manipulator. He wasn't very smart, actually, was he? He really was not that smart about this stuff when you could trace it all onto an email. And the other thing is, how cheap was he? He's already denied, or he said he can't recall receiving the money. But actually, when you think of what he is potentially gifting Epstein, billions of dollars worth of assets and land deals, and he seems to have got about $70,000 or pounds in exchange. His husband got another 10, maybe a little bit more than that. It doesn't seem like he had a very good deal unless he was after something even more craven than the money itself, which was the proximity to power. So I do think we have to sort of just breathe for a moment. You called it the What, the worst corruption scandal for half a century?
Well, I think it has the potential to shake down that way. Obviously, we've got to be careful because there's no form. Obviously, nothing has been proven yet, and Mandelson, as we'll discuss, denies that any impropriety has taken place. But look, as you say, Emily, I think put it very well. Look, this is at that time, and younger listeners won't necessarily remember this, but Mandelson was pretty much the second most important person in that government, in the Gordon Brown government, at a time, as you say, of historic significance, global economic tumult. And you would think that the de facto deputy PM, the business secretary, might have better things to be doing with his time than leaking a stream of government secrets to a foreign financier who, even by that time, certainly by 2009-10, had already received his conviction for soliciting sex from a minor. Exactly. I think we can see with this story that this has moved on quite profoundly, and I think there is a genuine sense of shock, even at the heart of politics and the heart of Westminster and Number 10 about this story. Look, before, the reason Mandelson resigned was because it became clear that his connection with, his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was even closer than had previously been known. It had been known that they had been friends, that they'd had a relationship, but with the documents coming out, the first tranche of documents from the DOJ, we could see that Number 10 felt that even they had been misled about the nature of that relationship. You can argue whether that's true or not. What we're seeing here is of a different order of magnitude. It's not just about that relationship being close. It's not just about it being humiliating or embarrassing or about his judgment and about the kind of taste, frankly, of continuing a friendship with someone like that. And it is a really close friendship. We see from these emails, he's calling him PT and Mandelson is calling him my favourite person and all of this kind of stuff. This takes it to the level of potential, serious, sustained government corruption. Because, as I say, what you cannot do, or I think what has shocked people, is the extent to which serious government secrets, serious government plans and government policies were being fed to Epstein, which, as I say, could clearly be commercially valuable to him. And atop of that, Mandelson having previously apparently received money, and even at that time contemporaneously receiving money for his partner for this osteopathy course. And, as we know from the emails later, and Mandelson is very clear about this in his interview, which we'll come on to with the Times that he's done, perhaps extraordinarily, where he says, one of the things that Epstein did was help guide him from the world of politics to the world of finance and business after Labour left office. And indeed, there is an email which shows Epstein advising Mandelson about potential board appointments, an appointment at Deutsche Bank where the remuneration was in the millions. Yeah. So clearly this was a mutual beneficial relationship where at the very least the perception of potential impropriety is profound.
I agree. And we have obviously no charges at this point. We have no convictions. But on the face of it, these allegations point to something that is not only clearly insider trading, inside government trading, but it looks quite treasonous, actually. When your country is on its knees and you are working against government policy, don't tax the bankers with their bonuses. There are no charges, there are no convictions. So obviously we're going carefully here, but the allegations seem to point to something that if it was an ordinary business, we'd call insider trading. But it's a government. You're at the heart of government. You have government secrets on your desk every single day. You are trusted with them. And so it actually starts to look more like something akin to treason. I mean, that sounds a ridiculous word to use in this day and age. But the sense you get is of an almost pantomime villain at this point. Somebody who is working against the best interests of their country and who would have got away with it if it hadn't been for those pesky kids, right? I mean, not to go too Scooby-Doo, but that is sort of the place that we're ending up at this point.
Well, I mean, just to expand on that, again, because I think younger listeners and viewers won't remember, this was a time when, as you say, Emily, the government, the Brown government, was trying to exact some form of political retribution on the banks for whom there was enormous righteous public anger at how they behaved in the run-up to the 2008 financial crisis. One of the ways in which the government tried to claw some of the money back that we the taxpayers, had put in, and for which we are still to this day paying for those massive government bailouts, about £75 billion, was a banker's bonus tax, a banker's bonus levy, because despite all of that, they were still, for many people, incredibly getting paid bankers' bonuses. And we now know from these emails that Mandelson was advising Epstein, who in turn appears to have been advising the US banking giant JP Morgan, to put pressure on his own chancellor, Alistair Darling, to, in Mandelson's word, threaten him. And we've, even overnight, people have gone back. Alistair Darling is no longer with us. He died in 2023. But in his memoir, he wrote about how Jamie Dimon, the chief executive of the US banking giant JP Morgan, rang him, which is clearly, partly at least, what Mandelson is suggesting, and raised with him, this is a quote from Darling's book, he said, Mr. Dimon was very, very angry. He said that his bank bought a lot of UK debt, and he wondered if that was now such a good idea.
So he did threaten him.
I pointed out that they bought our debt because it was a good business deal for them. He went on to say that they were thinking of building a new office in London, but they had to reconsider that now. Now, in the end, JP Morgan continued to buy government debt and they still built their new office. But literally we have, from Alistair Darling, the horse's mouth, the JP Morgan went through on Mandelson's advice, albeit apparently vicariously expressed, through Epstein, presumably, possibly. But
Epstein was changing the wording in the advice that Mandelson was going to give to Obama. So in other words, he was trying to change what the British government said to the US government about bankers' bonuses at a time of heightened sensitivity.
But just to build on your point about treachery, Emily, I mean, let's imagine for a moment, it didn't happen, but let's imagine for a moment that JP Morgan had stopped buying UK government debt. I mean, this was at a time when the UK government the deficit was even bigger than it is now, partly because we had to fund the bailouts for the banks. And here we have a situation where we've got the de facto Deputy Prime Minister advising, albeit through an intermediary, apparently reportedly, this particular bank to threaten the UK government to stop buying his own government's debt, which could have caused a financial crisis. Honestly, sometimes, we as journalists sort of try to assure people not to be too conspiratorial. How can you? But this would make, right, even a sort of Marxist conspiratorialist blush. You've basically got a financier, sort of New York-based financier, who also happens to be a paedophile, ringing up the British Deputy Prime Minister, who in turn is advising him to phone his banker mates to advise him that unless he doesn't take away, the British government doesn't take away the banker's bonus tax, we're going to stop buying debt. It would make, never mind a Marxist conspiratorialist, it would make QAnon blush.
Yeah, I mean, it is basically, it's got all the kind of ingredients of QAnon, but it is actually centred right in the middle of 10 Downing Street. Peter Mandelson gave an interview about 10 days ago, we think, to Katie Balls of The Times, and they had clearly sort of paused before running it. And on Sunday night, when he resigned from the Labour Party, one assumes she must have called him up and sort of updated her copy. And some of the stuff that he's told her, or that's come out of this interview, again just shows this extraordinary dislocation between where he thinks we are at and where potentially we are at. He tried to explain, for example, the money that was given to his husband, Renato de Silva, as a bursary, not realising perhaps that most bursaries don't just go sort of directly through email into somebody's bank account.
They're not usually wired directly. I mean, there's usually some criteria and process.
Yeah, I'm not sure we saw that. And I'm not sure that that the idea that you'd then go back and go, oh, this bursary, just call it a loan.
The Jeffrey Epstein osteopathy bursary scholarship.
Exactly. We've Googled that one.
Well, I just can't find the application process, funnily enough.
Next year, eh?
Yeah, I mean, and this interview, I mean, look, we actually said, didn't we, yesterday? I think I said that we wouldn't be hearing from Mandelson for a while. Well, I suppose it was a good 12 hours. And already the reset, as he calls it, the rehabilitation tour has begun in earnest. As you say, Emily, most of the interview done on January the 25th, but with an update on Sunday. And what's very clear from this interview is there is, and continues to be, as we have seen, a profound disconnect between how Mandelson sees this story and how the rest of the world, and certainly Westminster, is seeing this story. You might say a disconnect between reality and how Peter Mandelson is seeing this story. He says that there would be no point in his just crawling under a rock and going away because it wouldn't be proportionate. To try and get, I think, we're sat here like yesterday and today trying to understand the psychology of the man. One of our number perhaps has a greater understanding of that psychology than either you or I. Our own John Sopel, who is still in the Asia Pacific Bureau, manning that gainfully. Yeah, and he sent us his thoughts on where Peter Mandelson's mind might now be at.
So I've spoken to some of the people that have been closest to Peter Mandelson for years, decades even. I've got to say the reaction is sadness, shock, fury, disgust at the position that Peter Mandelson has got himself into and got others into. And one person I was speaking to said it was just insanity that he did an interview with Katie Balls for the Times this morning, that no one in his circle thought it was a good idea for him to do an interview with Laura Kuenssberg. I mean, those are the atmospherics. That's the PR advice that people are saying about what Peter Mandelson has done. I think the really substantive stuff is that this sense that I picked up, that they feel that Peter Mandelson has deceived them, has betrayed friendships, has betrayed people, that not only has he destroyed himself in what he's done, but he's destroyed a number of other people as well. One person said to me, I feel really sorry for Morgan McSweeney. I barely know the man, but look at where he is now, that he put his trust in Peter Mandelson, was assured there was nothing more to come out in terms of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, pushes for him to become the ambassador. And this person said to me, how did Peter Mandelson ever think he could become Britain's ambassador to Washington when there was that sort of baggage that was about to explode, which has done so now, which has damaged the reputation of the Starmer government, let aside what it's done to Peter Mandelson himself? And on the specifics of some of it, he says, look, the idea that in 2003-04, Peter Mandelson would have received $75,000, which actually equates to exactly what a year's salary was for an MP at the time, about £56,000. The idea that Peter Mandelson, a backbencher then, would have received that sum of money and wouldn't have remembered whether he had or he hadn't, this person said, just doesn't withstand scrutiny. He also says that the issue of this letter, that the email that was sent to Gordon Brown that Mandelson is alleged to have forwarded to Epstein, that frankly, Mandelson wasn't doing that to make money. It was more pathetic than that in a way, that it was all about approbation, that Peter Mandelson was seeking the approval of, look how well connected I am, look what I've just given you, I know everybody who matters, and here's an email that shows what the government is thinking of doing. And of course, it is that which could now get Peter Mandelson into serious legal jeopardy. But he's not listening to anybody. And apparently all the people that used to be a sounding board for advice are either being ignored or cast aside. And Peter Mandelson is doing all of this by himself without really realizing just how parlous his position has become, not in terms of reputation alone, but now in terms of legal exposure.
There is something to be said about this whole rehabilitation attempt, which is a kind of mission creep that I noticed at the beginning of the year, where he was popping up on broadcast interviews and he might do a few minutes on the Epstein relationship and sort of, yeah, I'm going to confront that. And then the conversation would just swiftly turn and it would be, well, what do you think about Trump's plans in Greenland? What do you think about foreign policy? What do you think about the man himself? What about Trump? And I think it is a big mistake to try and elide things when you've got somebody at the centre that seems still actually not to have answered the questions. And I remember being asked years ago by a sort of junior journalist who just secured an interview that she really wanted to do well, and it was with a French political figure in the arts world. And she said, but the trouble is, Emily, there are these kind of rape allegations. Should I do the rape allegations first and then it's meant to be about the art stuff? Or should I do the art stuff first and then talk about the rape allegations? Or how would you do it? And I went away and I literally just had to sort of sit in a dark room and think. And I came back and I said, you can't pivot from talking about rape allegations to talking about like their philosophy or their art or the book they've just written. You can't do it before, you can't do it after. It doesn't work. And I think, obviously, we're not talking about rape allegations, so I should make that very clear. But in the Peter Mandelson case, either you're doing an accountability interview because you're trying to get to the bottom of what was happening, or else, frankly, you're just ignoring it and asking him about Greenland. But the two do not sit well together. It doesn't work. And I think that is on us as the media, to take the issue of the Epstein files seriously enough, not to slip into that slightly lazy, oh, well, let's have your commentary on the Labour Party now.
And I look, I think Mandelson, as we're saying from that interview, clearly, and it's slightly, it feels very magazine-y, which is a sort of slightly odd thing because, there's sort of pictures of him in his kitchen and everything like that and so on. And clearly it's a very interesting, perhaps revealing sense of where he is at the moment. I'm not sure it's done him many favours, once again, which is perhaps a bit of a pattern of his recent interventions. There's so many threads to this that are unravelling almost minute by minute. I noticed some reporting just in the last few minutes from Steve Swinford, the political editor of The Times, saying that he's been told that Lord Mandelson, when he was a government minister, used his private BT internet email address to correspond directly with the most senior people in government, including Gordon Brown. Everyone had initially thought he forwarded government emails to his BT account and then passed them on to Epstein. In fact, two senior government sources have told him he was corresponding with ministers and officials using his BT internet account. The messages went directly to his BlackBerry and he sent them straight on to Epstein. The email address is now defunct. The Cabinet Office has no way of retrieving the messages on it. And that sounds like an absolutely extraordinary security breach.
Well, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like something that was serious enough for the head of the FBI, James Comey,
Absolutely.
to sort of stop, as it were, an election in its tracks in 2016 to talk about Hillary Clinton's email
Absolutely.
usage.
And the point about that now is it will inherently, this investigation the Cabinet Office have launched, that inherently limits the extent of the investigations they can do. For example, the Cabinet Office has today told police the emails in the Epstein cache show evidence that market-sensitive information was being passed to Epstein. But without the Epstein files, and this is the crucial point, the Cabinet Office itself, the UK government, would have no record of it as a result of the way that Mandelson conducted his email communications. So we are, and again, yet another layer of weirdness to this story. We are finding out about what could be, and
our
I say
own
again,
government
could be,
and
our own government,
politicians.
our own Prime Minister, finding out about what could be one of the most remarkable corruption scandals, as we say, in the last 50 years, but we are only finding out about it. Indeed, we could only ever have found out about it as a result of the DOJ investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. It might be tempting to think that there is nothing else going on in world politics apart from the contents of the Epstein files. But you might recall last week we did an episode about, just a little thing, how Donald Trump might be considering overturning American democracy. Well, the good news is that President Trump has called for American elections to, quote, be nationalized. Just listen to this.
And they vote illegally. And amazing that the Republicans aren't tougher on it. The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so...
With the fluidity of an angel delight, Dan Bongino has just gone from being former director of the FBI to being a podcast host.
Hey, don't knock it.
Hosting Trump.
Maybe we'll be the new head of the FBI.
Exactly, I've put in my resume.
Yeah.
So Trump has appeared on Dan Bongino's podcast to call for the nationalisation of elections by the Republican Party. And it's just good, isn't it? When you think that you're sitting there losing the plot, as we did for a moment last week, going...
Not for the first time.
Yeah, but he's not really going to rig the election. No, he's not really going to... No, he's not. I mean, just because he's taking ballots ballots away from Georgia just because he's actually taking American votes away from Georgia. He's not really thinking of rigging the elections. Well, sometimes he just says things out loud, and it's good to know what's on his mind.
Republican Party famously against any form of state control, of course, apart from nationalising elections. That old chestnut, which of course would be completely well, who knows what it means, but would be completely unconstitutional. But it almost seems trite to make that point.
Yes, and it's not funny. We've just had a lot of grief and grimness. So we'll leave it on that note. Bye for now.
Bye bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.